What could drive a son to allegedly take the lives of his own parents? It's a question that shakes the very foundation of what we think we know about family, love, and trust. For decades, the Reiners were a family admired in Hollywood and beyond. Rob Reiner, the legendary director, actor, and producer, was a household name. His wife, Michelle, a warm and beloved figure in her own right, stood by his side, building a family that many looked up to. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. They weren't just successful. They seemed untouchable, a picture of stability and love in an industry often defined by chaos. But then, in a single Sunday afternoon that would shock Los Angeles and ripple across the world, their lives were stolen in a way that no one could have imagined. December 14, 2025. The Brentwood estate, valued at an astonishing $13.5 million, was supposed to be a place of safety, of family, of holiday cheer. Instead, it became the scene of unimaginable tragedy. Rob and Michelle Reiner, aged 78 and 70 respectively, were found stabbed to death in their home. The discovery of their bodies was not made by a neighbor, a friend, or even law enforcement at first. It was their own daughter, Romy Reiner, who stumbled upon the unthinkable. The shock of seeing her parents like that, in the very place she grew up, is something that is impossible to capture in words. Grief, horror, disbelief, all crashing in a tidal wave that no one, not even the most hardened police officers, could have been prepared for. And then came the arrest. Nick Reiner, the 32-year-old son who lived in the guest house on the property, was taken into custody at 9:15 p.m. local time. The Los Angeles Police Department announced that investigators had determined Nick was responsible for his parents' deaths. First-degree murder charges were filed, bringing the full weight of the law down on him. If convicted, Nick faces a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole or even the death penalty. The city that had long celebrated the Reiners now found itself in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the image of a loving family with the horror that had unfolded behind closed doors. But the story doesn't stop there. In the days following the arrests, the Reiner family has had to navigate a surreal world of grief, media scrutiny, and legal proceedings. Their children, Romy, Jake, Tracy, were left not only to mourn their parents, but to confront the reality that one of their own had been accused of such a horrific act. The public statements they released are filled with heartbreak, gratitude, and a plea for understanding. Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing every moment of the day, they said. The horrific and devastating loss of our parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, is something that no one should ever experience. They weren't just our parents, they were our best friends. These words, raw and unfiltered, offer a glimpse into the depths of their grief. They also leave the audience questioning how a family so admired could unravel in such a catastrophic way. The Reiner statement also underscores the complexity of navigating public attention during a time of personal devastation. They expressed gratitude for the outpouring of support from family, friends, and even strangers from all walks of life. Yet, they made a careful appeal for privacy and compassion, urging people to temper speculation with humanity. This duality, the mix of mourning and public accountability, is central to the story we are about to unfold. It raises questions that we, as viewers, cannot ignore. How did it come to this? Could anything have been done to prevent it? And perhaps most importantly, what exactly happened on that fateful day? To understand the tragedy, we have to go beyond the headlines and the sound bites. We have to examine the family dynamics, the personal histories, and the events leading up to December 14th. Rob Reiner, known for his iconic films and his sometimes outspoken political stances, was a father who seemed to have it all: success, influence, and a devoted family. Michelle, equally devoted, balanced her role as mother, partner, and matriarch of the family. Together, they cultivated a life that many envied. But as is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. Even in families that seem perfect, tensions can build, struggles can go unseen, and pressures can become unbearable. Nick Reiner's life, in particular, is a critical piece of this puzzle. Living in the guest house of the family's Brentwood estate, Nick was close enough to be part of the family, yet separate enough to have his own space, his own world. Sources have hinted at long-standing struggles, personal challenges, and a life that was not without complications. But while some of these issues may have been known privately, they were never public knowledge until now. In the coming chapters, we will explore these aspects of Nick's life in depth, including his relationships, his mental and emotional state, and the moments that may have foreshadowed this tragedy. The day of the murders itself reads like a chilling narrative in a crime novel. Romy discovering her parents, the police arriving, the investigation unfolding. It is a sequence of events that no family should ever endure. Yet it is also the beginning of the legal story that will dominate headlines for months to come. Defense attorney Alan Jackson confirmed that Nick had not been medically cleared to be transported to court at the time of his initial appearances, highlighting the additional complexity and tension surrounding the case. Every detail, every revelation, every public statement adds layers to a story that is both heartbreaking and confounding. As we move forward, it is essential to remember the human element behind these events. This is not just a story of crime and punishment. It is a story of loss, grief, and a family attempting to make sense of something that defies understanding. The emotional stakes are as high as the legal ones, and the repercussions will ripple through Hollywood, through Los Angeles, and through the lives of everyone who knew the Reiners. How do you process the idea that someone you love, someone you raised, could be accused of committing an act so devastating? How do you reconcile admiration for a family's public achievements with the horror of their private tragedy? We also must confront the media's role in shaping this narrative. From the first news reports to the latest social media reactions, the story has been dissected, analyzed, and debated by people around the world. Yet, amidst all the speculation and commentary, there remains the unshakable reality of loss. The parents are gone, and their children are left to navigate a world forever changed. It is a reality that is difficult to face, yet impossible to ignore. And now, we approach the first moments in court where Nick and Tracy Reiner spoke. Their apologies, their attempts to explain, and the emotions that unfolded in that courtroom are unlike anything most people have witnessed. These moments promise to shed light on the darkest corners of this tragedy while simultaneously raising new questions. What did they reveal? What did they withhold? How will their words affect the legal proceedings, the public's perception, and the family's healing process? These are questions we will explore in the chapters ahead. As we begin this journey into the Reiner family tragedy, keep in mind that the story is far from straightforward. Every revelation, every statement, every courtroom exchange will deepen our understanding, but also our shock. Families are complicated, motives are murky, and truth often lies somewhere in the shadows. By the end of this video, you will have seen the tragedy in its entirety, from the public persona to the private despair, from the heartbreak to the courtroom drama. What do we really know about a family until tragedy exposes the cracks? The Reiners were more than Hollywood royalty. They were an institution, a household name that seemed untouchable. Rob Reiner had a career that most could only dream of, a string of iconic films, and a reputation that spanned decades. Michelle Reiner, while often less in the spotlight, was the glue of the family, the steady hand, the nurturing presence who balanced fame with family. Together, they built a life that appeared perfect from the outside. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. Rob Reiner's career is legendary. From his early acting days on the All in the Family series to directing box office hits like When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and A Few Good Men, he carved out a place in Hollywood that few could rival. He was respected, admired, even feared for his sharp intellect and quick wit. But beyond the accolades, Rob was a father. He and Michelle raised 4 children in a sprawling Brentwood estate, carefully constructing an environment meant to be both safe and inspiring. They were known to host gatherings, support causes, and maintain a presence that was approachable yet elite. People wanted to be in their world, and few ever thought tragedy could touch it. Michelle, on the other hand, was often described as the quiet force behind the family. She was loving, attentive, and deeply involved in her children's lives. Friends recall family dinners filled with laughter, road trips, and long talks about life. She was the heart of the Reiners, a stabilizing presence in a world that was constantly in motion. Together, Rob and Michelle built a family that was admired not only for their fame, but for the relationships they nurtured within their household. At first glance, they were the kind of parents everyone aspired to have. Yet even in families that seem ideal, tension can simmer beneath the surface. Nick, their eldest son, or at least the one living in the guest house, had his own battles. While Romy, Jake, and Tracy were navigating the world outside the Brentwood gates, Nick was closer to home, yet not fully integrated into the family's public persona. Sources suggest that he faced personal struggles, issues with mental health, isolation, and friction within family dynamics. These were never topics for dinner conversation in front of outsiders. They were kept private, contained behind the estate's walls, hidden from a world eager to see perfection. Family members are often the first to notice signs of trouble, long before the public is aware. Friends say that while the Reiners were united in appearance, there were moments of tension that hinted at deeper struggles. Arguments over inheritance, disagreements over lifestyle choices, and simple misunderstandings built pressure that no one outside the family could perceive. The irony is brutal. A family known for love, support, and warmth could be harboring turmoil so intense that it would ultimately erupt in violence. The children, in particular, played roles shaped by both public perception and private reality. Romy, the daughter who discovered her parents' bodies, is often described as responsible, protective, and deeply connected to her family. Jake and Tracy had their own lives, yet the shared experience of growing up in the Reiner household shaped their identities profoundly. And then there was Nick, whose life, choices, and struggles would become the center of a tragedy the world is still trying to comprehend. But what about the family's daily life? How did they interact? Who noticed the subtle shifts in behavior that hinted at something far more serious? Brentwood, known for its luxury, privacy, and exclusivity, became the stage for a drama no one outside the walls could have predicted. Friends and neighbors describe a quiet, upscale neighborhood where families like the Reiners could live without constant scrutiny. And yet, in this environment of privilege and security, tragedy found its way in. It's also essential to consider the pressures of legacy. Rob Reiner's career wasn't just a series of successes. It was a weight, an expectation placed not only on him, but on his children. Growing up in a household where one parent is a Hollywood legend can be intoxicating, inspiring, and terrifying all at once. For some children, it is a motivation. For others, a source of constant comparison and stress. Did Nick feel overshadowed? Did he struggle to meet expectations, whether explicit or implied? These questions are difficult, painful, and yet vital to understanding the context of what happened. Even friends and colleagues have commented on the family's outward image versus the private reality. Publicly, they appeared cohesive, loving, and presentable, a model family. Privately, sources suggest there were disagreements and strains, though the specifics remain largely confidential. This duality, public perfection and private discord, is a recurring theme in high-profile families. And in some cases, it can become a pressure cooker, a setup for conflict that escalates beyond repair. There's also the emotional weight of understanding a parent's role in a child's development. Rob and Michelle, despite their fame, were devoted parents. They guided, they nurtured, and they loved. Yet, no parent is perfect. No matter the intent, mistakes are made, boundaries are tested, and tensions flare. Could these dynamics have played a role in the events leading to December 14th? Could long-standing emotional patterns, combined with unaddressed personal struggles, have created conditions ripe for tragedy? The answers are not simple, and yet the questions linger. As we examine the family's history, it becomes clear that the Reiners were emblematic of both success and struggle. They had wealth, status, and influence. They had love, loyalty, and tradition. But they also had complexity, conflict, and private challenges that the public never saw. This contrast is what makes the story so compelling, so shocking, and so profoundly human. It reminds us that no family, no matter how outwardly perfect, is immune to pain, loss, or conflict. And now, as we turn the lens to the day of the tragedy, the layers of this family history become critical. Understanding the legacy, the relationships, and the pressures that shaped Nick, Tracy, Romy, and Jake provides context for the events that would unfold in the Brentwood estate. It sets the stage for the shocking court appearances, the emotional apologies, and the legal battles that have captured public attention. But even with all this context, one question remains. What happened on that day that could transform a family from admired to infamous in a matter of hours? The answer, as we will discover, is not simple. It involves a mixture of personal struggle, familial tension, and circumstances that collided with devastating consequences. It is a story that will challenge assumptions about family, loyalty, and the very nature of human behavior. It will force us to ask uncomfortable questions. How well do we really know our loved ones? How do hidden struggles manifest in unexpected ways? And what does it take for a moment of crisis to become a lifetime of consequences? The Reiners' legacy, once defined by success, love, and influence, is now entwined with grief, questions, and public scrutiny. Their story is a cautionary tale and a tragic chronicle, a reminder that even those we idolize are human, vulnerable, and capable of being caught in circumstances beyond comprehension. It is a story that will unfold in the coming chapters, each revelation adding to our understanding while deepening the sense of shock and heartbreak. And as we move closer to the events of December 14th, one truth becomes increasingly clear. Behind every facade of perfection lies a story untold, tensions unspoken, and consequences unimaginable. The Reiner family, once admired for their harmony, now becomes the epicenter of a tragedy that leaves the world asking questions that may never be fully answered. What do we really know about a person until everything they've ever known unravels? Nick Reiner, the 32-year-old son of Rob and Michelle Reiner, was suddenly the center of one of Hollywood's most shocking tragedies. Headlines labeled him the suspect, the accused, the son who allegedly took the lives of his own parents. But who was Nick before this nightmare? What shaped him? What struggles did he face? And what events might have led to the moment that changed his family forever? Nick grew up in a household that blended fame with family warmth. On the surface, he had everything. A father who was a celebrated Hollywood icon, a mother who was loving and attentive, siblings who were supportive, and a life of privilege and opportunity in Brentwood. But privilege, as anyone who has ever lived under its weight knows, can be double-edged. Expectations are higher, scrutiny is constant, and the pressure to meet parental, societal, and personal standards can become suffocating. Did Nick feel this weight more heavily than others? Was there a growing sense of isolation that went unnoticed, or worse, was brushed aside in a family that always tried to maintain appearances? Friends and distant relatives described Nick as a quiet, introspective individual. He wasn't as public-facing as his siblings, who had careers, social lives, and public personas. He lived in the guest house of the Brentwood estate, close enough to his family to remain part of their daily lives, yet separate enough to create a space that felt like his own world. It was in that space that much of his life unfolded away from the public eye. But solitude, while sometimes comforting, can also magnify challenges. Personal struggles, when unshared or unsupported, can intensify over time. Nick's relationships, too, were often complicated. While his siblings moved in circles both socially and professionally, Nick appeared to navigate a quieter path, sometimes disconnected, other times deeply involved in family matters. There were hints from close sources that he faced challenges, emotional, mental, and perhaps even financial, that made him feel different, isolated, or pressured in ways the rest of the world couldn't see. These challenges were private, known only to the family, making it difficult for outsiders to understand the true depth of what he might have been experiencing. Mental health, as many experts remind us, is often invisible until a crisis erupts. Friends describe Nick as someone who could be charming, funny, and intelligent, but who also carried a quiet intensity that sometimes alarmed those closest to him. There were moments of brilliance and connection, but there were also times of withdrawal and frustration. It's a dynamic that is tragically common in families. The child who seems fine on the surface but is struggling underneath. But what about the immediate period leading up to December 14th? In the days and weeks prior, sources suggest there were tensions in the household. Small disagreements, subtle arguments, and unresolved conflicts can build over time, layering stress upon stress until one small trigger can ignite a much larger reaction. The Reiner household, with its wealth, privacy, and expectations may have created an environment where stress and frustration were magnified rather than diffused. What exactly happened in those days? We may never know all the details, but the consequences were catastrophic. Nick's life outside the family also paints a picture of someone attempting to find his place in the world. Employment, social connections, hobbies, and personal projects were all part of the mix. Yet even as he engaged in these pursuits, the undercurrents of emotional strain were reportedly present. Friends described moments of isolation, quiet frustration, and occasional withdrawal from family gatherings or social events. Did anyone anticipate that these subtle signs could be precursors to something so unimaginable? Most likely not. Siblings play a critical role in understanding family dynamics. Romy, Tracy, and Jake were all navigating their own lives, yet they were intimately connected to Nick. Sibling relationships are rarely simple. They involve rivalry, loyalty, love, and tension all at once. There may have been moments of closeness and understanding, but also moments of misunderstanding and conflict. These dynamics, subtle in ordinary circumstances, can become amplified when tragedy strikes. Did the siblings notice warning signs in Nick? Did they try to intervene, or was the struggle largely invisible until it was too late? Another piece of the puzzle is the public perception versus private reality. To the world, Nick may have appeared as just another member of a high-profile family, perhaps living comfortably, perhaps pursuing his own interests. But behind the gates of Brentwood, his experiences, his emotions, and his struggles were deeply personal. Public personas can be misleading, and in this case, they may have masked the challenges that ultimately culminated in tragedy. It is also important to consider the psychological factors at play. Experts in family dynamics often point out that long-standing stressors, unresolved conflicts, and feelings of isolation can create conditions where even a generally stable individual may act unpredictably under pressure. While no one can definitively say what triggered Nick's alleged actions, understanding these factors helps paint a broader picture of the pressures he may have faced. It's not an excuse, it's context. And yet, despite all these complexities, Nick's life before December 14th also had moments of normalcy, joy, and connection. He was a son, a brother, a friend. He experienced laughter, shared family meals, participated in celebrations. These glimpses of ordinary life make the subsequent tragedy all the more jarring. How could someone with these experiences, with these relationships, be capable of the acts he is accused of? It is a question that haunts everyone who follows the story, from family members to strangers on the internet. The tension between what we see and what we don't see is central to understanding Nick's story. In families, especially high-profile ones, there are layers of expectation, scrutiny, and privacy that outsiders rarely comprehend. Every choice, every conflict, every moment of isolation contributes to a larger, complex narrative. Nick's life, viewed in this light, is a portrait of contradiction, loved and supported, yet struggling, present and connected, yet isolated, capable and intelligent, yet facing personal demons. And now, as we approach the events of December 14th, these layers become critical. Understanding Nick's background, the pressures, the struggles, the family dynamics, sets the stage for the day that would change everything. It allows us to see him not just as a headline, not just as a suspect, but as a human being shaped by circumstances, relationships, and choices. It also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Were there signs that were ignored, misunderstood, or underestimated? And most importantly, what happened in the hours leading up to the murders that pushed this family to the brink? What happens when a day that seems ordinary turns into a nightmare you can never wake up from? December 14th, 2025, started like any other Sunday for the Reiner family. The Brentwood estate, a sprawling $13.5 million sanctuary, was quiet in the morning, the kind of peace only a private neighborhood in Los Angeles can offer. Sunlight filtered through the manicured trees, and the city hummed far below, oblivious to the horror that would unfold. Rob and Michelle Reiner, aged 78 and 70, likely had routines, coffee in the kitchen, conversations about the day, perhaps planning calls or small errands. But in mere hours, those routines would be shattered beyond repair. Romy Reiner, their daughter, remembers the day with the kind of horror that can never fully leave someone. She entered the house, expecting the usual warmth of her parents' presence, only to be confronted with a scene that would haunt her forever. Rob and Michelle had been stabbed to death, victims of a violent act that seemed incomprehensible. The very people who had nurtured, guided, and loved their children were gone, and the reality of that loss hit with a force no one could prepare for. In moments like these, time seems to slow. Romy's discovery set off a chain reaction that would engulf not just her immediate family, but the world. Friends, neighbors, and eventually the media would learn of the tragedy. Emergency services were called. The Los Angeles Police Department responded quickly, but their presence, as thorough and professional as it was, could not undo what had happened. This was the beginning of a story that would grip the public and dominate headlines. A story of grief, shock, and unimaginable betrayal. By 9:15 p.m. local time, Nick Reiner, who had been living in the guest house on the property, was taken into custody. The police confirmed that he was considered responsible for the deaths of his parents. First-degree murder charges were filed, carrying the potential of life imprisonment without parole or even the death penalty. The city that had long admired the Reiner family now struggled to comprehend how such a tragedy could occur within one of its most celebrated households. But to truly understand the events of that day, we must examine not just the actions, but the atmosphere leading up to them. Families, even those that appear perfect, often have hidden pressures and tensions. Long-standing grievances, unspoken frustrations, and emotional strains can accumulate like storm clouds over a summer sky. And when those clouds finally burst, the result can be catastrophic. The Reiner family, admired for decades, was no exception. As news of the murders spread, the public was shocked by the juxtaposition of fame and tragedy. Rob Reiner, celebrated for films that captured the hearts and minds of millions, and Michelle, beloved for her devotion to family and community, were suddenly the center of a horrific narrative. Friends, colleagues, and fans expressed disbelief, grief, and confusion. Social media exploded with condolences, speculation, and horror. Yet amid the chaos, one question lingered. How could a son allegedly commit such a crime against his own parents? Understanding the day also means considering the immediate reactions of those closest to the victims. Romy, having discovered the bodies, experienced shock, grief, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Her siblings, Jake and Tracy, were thrown into a world of heartbreak and disbelief, forced to navigate grief while grappling with the reality that their brother was now a suspect. The emotional toll was immense, compounded by the intense scrutiny of the public eye. For law enforcement, the investigation had to be meticulous. Officers had to secure the scene, collect evidence, and piece together a narrative that explained the events leading to the murders. Statements were gathered, forensic details analyzed, and timelines reconstructed. Every piece of evidence mattered, and every detail could influence the legal process that would follow. Yet even with these procedures, the human aspect, the grief, the shock, the trauma, remained at the forefront, coloring every interaction and decision. Media coverage intensified as the story unfolded. Rolling Stone, TMZ, and other outlets provided updates, quoting sources close to the family and law enforcement officials. The narrative was chilling. Rob and Michelle Reiner found dead in their own home, their son arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Headlines highlighted the horror, the fame, and the legal stakes, capturing public attention across the globe. But beyond the media frenzy lay the human story. A family forever changed, a community in mourning, and a legal process just beginning. In the hours following the discovery, family members released statements that reflected both their grief and their desire for privacy. Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing every moment of the day, they wrote. The horrific and devastating loss of our parents is something that no one should ever experience. Their message was clear. This was a family in shock, attempting to process an unthinkable tragedy while appealing for compassion and understanding. Yet even as the world mourned, questions persisted. How did the events escalate to this point? Were there warning signs that were missed? What were the family dynamics in the days and weeks leading up to the murders? These questions would dominate public discourse and legal examination for months, if not years, to come. They are questions without easy answers, yet they are essential to understanding the gravity and complexity of the tragedy. The discovery of Rob and Michelle's bodies also cast a stark light on the nature of grief and trauma. For Romy, Jake, and Tracy, the loss was deeply personal and irrevocable. For friends and the wider public, the tragedy was shocking and surreal, a reminder that even those we admire most are not immune to suffering. It highlighted the fragility of life, the unpredictability of human behavior, and the devastating consequences that can arise from familial conflict, mental health struggles, and private turmoil. As night fell on December 14th, the Brentwood estate transformed from a place of security and comfort into a scene of investigation and heartbreak. Police officers, forensic teams, and investigators worked meticulously to gather evidence, document the scene, and begin the painstaking process of understanding what had transpired. Each step in the investigation added layers to the story, revealing details that were both heartbreaking and disturbing. And yet, the most compelling part of the story was yet to come. The arrest of Nick Reiner would set in motion a legal process that would expose even more about the family's private life, their struggles, and the emotional weight carried by each member. Courtroom appearances, statements, and apologies would bring the human aspect of this tragedy to the forefront, forcing the public to grapple with questions of responsibility, morality, and the limits of familial love. The day of the murders is now etched into the collective memory of those who follow the story. It is a day of horror, confusion, and heartbreak. But as devastating as the events were, they also mark the beginning of a story that would unfold in courtrooms, media reports, and public discourse. The discovery of the bodies, the arrest, and the immediate legal proceedings were only the opening chapter of a narrative that would expose both the darkness and the humanity within the Reiner family. And as we prepare to enter the courtroom, where Nick and Tracy Reiner would offer their apologies and attempt to explain the unexplainable, one question remains. What did they say? How could words in a legal setting carry the weight of grief, guilt, and heartbreak all at once? The answers to these questions would shock, sadden, and leave the world questioning everything it thought it knew about the Reiner family. What does it feel like when the person you trusted most is suddenly the center of the most horrific crime imaginable? For the Reiner family, that question became reality on the night of December 14, 2025. Nick Reiner, the 32-year-old son who had lived quietly in the guest house of the Brentwood estate, was taken into custody by the Los Angeles Police Department. The news sent shockwaves not just through Hollywood, but across the nation. A family once admired for its warmth, love, and success was now the center of a criminal investigation that no one could have predicted. The arrest itself was swift. By 9:15 p.m. local time, Nick had been detained after investigators determined he was responsible for the deaths of his parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner. Police reports confirmed that the scene in the main house provided sufficient evidence to implicate Nick, although many details remain sealed as part of the ongoing investigation. The gravity of the moment was undeniable. A son, a brother, a member of one of Hollywood's most celebrated families, now facing first-degree murder charges that carried the possibility of life without parole or even the death penalty. The legal stakes were immense. Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman outlined the seriousness of the charges in a press conference following the arrest. First-degree murder is a charge that reflects premeditation and intent, he said. The investigation will proceed methodically, and the evidence will be presented to ensure justice is served. For the Reiner family, these words, while procedural, were emotionally devastating. They underscored the reality that the tragedy was not only personal, but also legal, placing the family into the crosshairs of the judicial system. But what led to Nick's arrest? Law enforcement officials explained that investigators had conducted a meticulous review of the scene, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together timelines that pointed to him. The nature of the crime, stabbings occurring within the private confines of the Reiner estate, made the investigation both urgent and complex. Authorities had to balance evidence collection with sensitivity to a grieving family, all while managing a case that had become a media sensation. The arrest marked the culmination of this initial investigative effort, signaling a shift from speculation to formal legal proceedings. Nick's legal representation added another layer of complexity. Alan Jackson, a defense attorney confirmed to represent him, stated that his client had not been medically cleared for transport to court immediately following the arrest. Whether due to mental health concerns, physical condition, or other medical issues, this delay highlighted the multifaceted nature of the case. It wasn't just about the alleged crime. It was about the well-being of an individual who had been thrust into a situation beyond his control under intense public scrutiny. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with shock, disbelief, and speculation. Friends, acquaintances, and fans struggled to reconcile the image of the Reiner family they had admired with the grim reality presented by the arrest. The juxtaposition of fame and tragedy created a narrative that was hard to digest. How could a family that seemed so close-knit be torn apart in such a violent, irreversible way? Questions circulated about Nick's motives, mental state, and the events leading up to the murders, though many answers would only emerge through the legal process. Meanwhile, family members were grappling with a surreal and painful reality. Romy, Tracy, and Jake were now forced to confront not only the death of their parents, but also the possibility that their brother had committed an unthinkable act. Their grief was compounded by the public nature of the situation, making private mourning nearly impossible. Statements released by the family reflected this dual burden, expressing both heartbreak and a desire for privacy. "We ask for respect and compassion," they said, "for speculation to be tempered with humanity." These words, heartfelt and earnest, underscored the complexity of navigating personal tragedy under the glare of public scrutiny. The charges themselves were severe. First-degree murder is among the most serious in the legal system, reflecting intentionality, planning, and deliberation. The potential penalties, life without parole or the death penalty, illustrate the gravity of the accusation. The legal system would now take over, examining every aspect of Nick's life, every interaction with his parents, and every moment leading up to the tragedy. Court appearances, hearings, and potentially a high-profile trial would follow, all under the watchful eyes of a global audience. As part of the investigation, authorities also had to navigate the family's private dynamics. The Reiner estate, with its multiple buildings and extensive property, was more than just a home. It was a space filled with memories, personal histories, and intimate moments. Investigators had to balance forensic rigor with sensitivity, understanding that every piece of evidence carried emotional weight for the surviving family members. The arrest of Nick marked the beginning of a legal journey that would examine not only actions but motivations, relationships, and psychological states. Media coverage played a critical role in shaping public perception. Outlets reported on the arrest with urgency, analyzing statements from law enforcement, legal experts, and the family itself. The narrative was intense. A son arrested for the alleged murder of his parents, a family in shock, and the promise of a legal process that could take months or even years. Headlines highlighted the drama, the tragedy, and the questions left unanswered. Yet amid this coverage, the human story, the grief, confusion, and emotional complexity was often the most compelling aspect, reminding the public that behind every headline is a family trying to survive a nightmare. Nick's arrest also raised difficult questions about mental health, accountability, and the unseen pressures within families. While legal proceedings focus on evidence and charges, the broader conversation inevitably turns to why such tragedies occur. Could intervention have prevented the violence? Were there warning signs that were ignored or misunderstood? These questions, while impossible to answer definitively, linger in the background, shaping both public perception and legal strategy. The night of the arrest was only the beginning. What followed were court proceedings, medical evaluations, and family confrontations that would continue to reveal the human and emotional dimensions of the case. Every statement, every court appearance, and every media interview would add to a complex narrative that blended law, grief, and the very real struggle of a family attempting to come to terms with a loss unlike any other. How do you find your voice when the unthinkable has happened? For the Reiner family, the days following December 14th were filled with unimaginable grief, confusion, and an urgent need to process what had occurred. While the world watched headlines with a mixture of horror and curiosity, Romy, Jake, and Tracy Reiner faced a far more personal, far more devastating reality. Their parents were gone, and their brother Nick was accused of taking their lives. The grief was immediate, profound, and all-consuming. Yet in the midst of sorrow, there came a need to speak, to release emotions, and to communicate with both the public and the media that had descended upon their tragedy. On Tuesday following the murders, the Reiner children broke their silence with a statement that was both heartbreaking and deeply human. Words cannot even begin to describe the unimaginable pain we are experiencing every moment of the day, they wrote. The horrific and devastating loss of our parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, is something that no one should ever experience. They weren't just our parents, they were our best friends. It was a simple, yet profoundly powerful acknowledgement of the depth of their loss. In that statement, they captured not only their grief but also the bond they shared with their parents, a bond that was tragically severed in a single, violent act. The statement did more than mourn. It provided insight into the family's immediate emotional landscape. We are grateful for the outpouring of condolences, kindness, and support we have received not only from family and friends, but people from all walks of life, they continued. This acknowledgement revealed the duality of their situation. While dealing with immense personal pain, they were also navigating the public attention that came with being members of a prominent Hollywood family. The Reiners were experiencing grief amplified by the media, their loss scrutinized, analyzed, and often misinterpreted in real time. For Romy, who had discovered her parents' bodies, the trauma was immediate and visceral. To walk into your childhood home and find your parents murdered is an experience that defies comprehension. It is not only a confrontation with mortality, but also a jarring shift in reality, where familiar spaces become haunting reminders of loss. Romy's statement, carefully worded yet filled with raw emotion, hinted at this duality, the public facade of composure and the private, chaotic grief that no words can fully capture. Tracy and Jake, while perhaps not present at the scene, were equally impacted. Siblings often share a complex network of emotions. Loyalty, rivalry, love, and resentment can coexist in ways that are subtle yet powerful. In the aftermath of tragedy, these relationships are tested to their limits. For Tracy and Jake, the struggle was not only mourning their parents, but also grappling with the reality that their brother was at the center of a legal storm that threatened to define their family publicly for years to come. The family statement also contained a plea for humanity. We now ask for respect and privacy, for speculation to be tempered with compassion and humanity, and for our parents to be remembered for the incredible lives they lived and the love they gave. This appeal is both reasonable and poignant. It reflects the family's desire to maintain dignity in the face of horror, to ensure that their parents are remembered for their accomplishments and love rather than solely for the circumstances of their deaths. It also highlights the tension between public fascination and private grief, a tension that many high-profile families struggle with in times of crisis. Friends and colleagues of the Reiner family echoed these sentiments. Many described Rob and Michelle as deeply loving parents, devoted spouses, and individuals who cared genuinely for those around them. The contrast between the public image of the family and the tragedy that unfolded was stark, and it amplified the shock felt across Hollywood and beyond. The Reiner children's decision to speak out, even minimally, provided a humanizing lens through which the world could view the tragedy. They were no longer just the siblings of a suspect. They were grieving children navigating a nightmare scenario. In breaking their silence, the Reiners also acknowledged the broader community's support. Messages of condolence poured in from fans, friends, and strangers alike. These gestures, while small in the face of such loss, offered a measure of comfort and validation for the family. They reinforced the notion that tragedy, while intensely personal, resonates universally, and that even in moments of profound grief, there can be connections that provide solace. Yet the statement left lingering questions. What did the siblings know about Nick's state of mind? Were there signs of tension, conflict, or struggle that went unnoticed or unaddressed? And how did they reconcile the image of their brother with the allegations against him? These questions, both private and public, would come to dominate discussions about the Reiner family in the weeks and months following the tragedy. The statement also reflected an awareness of the public narrative. In high-profile cases, media coverage can often overshadow the human experience. By issuing a clear, heartfelt message, the Reiners attempted to reclaim some control over the story, to ensure that their parents' legacy was not lost amidst sensational headlines. They highlighted the love, compassion, and kindness of Rob and Michelle, emphasizing that while the circumstances of their deaths were horrific, their lives had been defined by generosity, creativity, and deep familial bonds. Family reactions in such tragedies are never monolithic. Each sibling processes grief differently, and each may experience complex emotions toward the accused, especially when that accused is a family member. The Reiner children faced a reality filled with contradictions. Mourning the loss of their parents while grappling with the possibility of their brother's culpability. These conflicting emotions are natural, yet they are rarely straightforward to express publicly, particularly in a family so scrutinized by media and society. The emotional weight of speaking out in court would come to define the next chapter of their story. Tracy and Nick's eventual apologies, delivered under intense legal scrutiny, would not only reveal their personal grief, but also shed light on the broader emotional and familial dynamics at play. These moments, raw and unfiltered, promised to expose the human side of a tragedy that had been dominated by headlines, speculation, and shock. Yet even as the Reiner children expressed their grief publicly, one truth remained inescapable: the tragedy was far from over. Legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and personal reconciliation would dominate their lives for months, if not years. Every statement, every interview, and every court appearance would become part of a narrative that was larger than any individual, larger than the family, and larger than Hollywood itself. As we move toward the courtroom, where Nick and Tracy Reiner would confront both legal and emotional realities, it is essential to remember the context provided by these initial reactions. They reveal grief, humanity, and resilience, even amidst devastation. They also foreshadow the intense emotional moments that would follow in court: apologies, explanations, and confessions that would challenge our understanding of family, loyalty, and tragedy. What is it like to stand in a courtroom, facing the people you love, the world watching, and the weight of unimaginable guilt pressing down on you? For Nick and Tracy Reiner, the day they entered court was a convergence of grief, fear, and the desperate need to be heard. After the shocking events of December 14th, the public, the media, and the legal system demanded answers. And in that courtroom, for the first time, words, painful, raw, and deeply human, were offered in an attempt to make sense of the unthinkable. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, thick with emotion. Lawyers moved quietly, court officials organized proceedings with precision, and the gallery was filled with reporters and observers, all eager to witness what would unfold. Yet amid this organized chaos, the human story was paramount. Nick and Tracy were not simply defendants or family members. They were children mourning their parents, siblings grappling with their brother's alleged actions, and participants in a tragedy that had captivated the public's attention. Tracy Reiner, speaking first, struggled to maintain composure. Her voice quivered as she addressed the court, her words a mixture of grief, remorse, and the desperate attempt to explain. "We are shattered beyond comprehension," she said. "Our parents, Rob and Michelle, were our anchors, our guides, our safest places. Losing them is a pain that cannot be put into words. We grieve, we mourn, and we are trying to understand how life could change so drastically in a single moment." Her statement, though brief, revealed the raw humanity of the situation. It wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a family confronting the unimaginable, attempting to navigate the gulf between personal tragedy and public scrutiny. The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air, leaving observers with a chilling sense of the emotional devastation the family faced. Then came Nick's turn. Standing at the defendant's table, he faced a complex mix of emotions: fear, shame, sorrow, and perhaps confusion. He began with an apology, a simple yet profoundly significant acknowledgement of the pain his actions, or the actions attributed to him, had caused. "I cannot express how deeply sorry I am," Nick said. "I know nothing I say can bring back my parents. I know nothing I do can undo what has happened. I can only offer my remorse, my grief, and my hope that someday, somehow, healing may be possible." Nick's words were deliberate but strained, revealing the emotional pressure of speaking while under scrutiny and facing charges of the highest severity. Legal experts note that such apologies, while emotionally resonant, carry significant weight in public perception and can influence both media narrative and courtroom proceedings. Yet for the Reiner family, these words were more than strategy. They were an attempt to articulate feelings that were otherwise uncontainable. Observers noted the stark contrast between the formal nature of the courtroom and the intensely personal nature of the apologies. Typically, courtrooms are spaces of procedure, evidence, and legal argumentation. But on this day, they were transformed into a stage for human grief and reconciliation, where the boundaries between public and private, legal and emotional, blurred in the most profound ways. Every pause, every falter in speech, and every tear was a testament to the depth of the tragedy. Tracy and Nick's statements were interwoven with references to family, memory, and the enduring love of Rob and Michelle Reiner. They emphasized that despite the alleged events, their parents' legacy remained intact, a life filled with love, guidance, and the cultivation of strong family bonds. In doing so, they sought to redirect focus from the horror of the crime to the humanity and goodness of the individuals who had been lost. It was a delicate balance, one that highlighted both grief and the responsibility to honor the deceased. Yet even as apologies were made, the courtroom remained charged with tension. Questions lingered. How could Nick reconcile his actions, or the actions he was accused of, with his love for his parents? What motivated the behavior that led to such a catastrophic outcome? Could apologies ever truly address the enormity of loss? These were questions that legal authorities, observers, and the family itself would grapple with for weeks, months, and years to come. The emotional intensity was compounded by the media presence. Cameras, microphones, and reporters documented every word, capturing not only the statements themselves, but also the reactions of the courtroom, the attorneys, and the family members present. In a case already under intense public scrutiny, every nuance mattered: a tear, a stammer, a gesture. The Reiner's humanity, displayed so openly, became both a focal point and a lens through which the world would attempt to understand the tragedy. Nick's apology also hinted at deeper struggles, though carefully measured to avoid compromising legal strategy. There were glimpses of self-awareness, moments where remorse and recognition of the consequences surfaced, and instances where the complexity of his emotions was palpable. Experts analyzing the statements noted that such expressions, while emotionally compelling, also carry legal implications, potentially affecting both sentencing and public perception. Yet in that moment, the legal ramifications were secondary to the raw need to express grief, sorrow, and a desire for understanding. Tracy's words, too, provided insight into the family dynamic. She described the closeness she shared with her parents, highlighting memories of guidance, laughter, and familial support. In doing so, she reminded the public, and perhaps herself, of the humanity behind the tragedy. Even amidst horror, there was love, there was history, and there was the indelible impact of parents who shaped the lives of their children with care, dedication, and enduring affection. The courtroom scene, with its apologies and emotional revelations, marked a turning point in the narrative. It shifted focus from the crime itself to the human story underlying it: grief, remorse, and the struggle to reconcile love with loss. Observers were left with profound questions about morality, accountability, and the fragility of human relationships. How could such love coexist with such tragedy? What unseen pressures or dynamics could lead to this outcome? And just as the apologies concluded, the courtroom shifted once more toward the legal proceedings, where evidence, testimonies, and investigations would begin to piece together a narrative that had previously been only partially visible. What the family had shared in words was only a glimpse of the larger story, a story that would continue to unfold with revelations, contradictions, and emotional beats that no one could have anticipated. But what came next? the first testimonies, the evidence, the revelations that would emerge during hearings, would expose truths about the family, the dynamics, and the events leading to December 14th that no one could have imagined. And no one was prepared for the depth of what would be uncovered. What does it truly mean to face the law when the stakes are life, death, and the unraveling of a family legacy? For Nick Reiner, December 14th was only the beginning. The days and weeks that followed marked the start of a legal journey that would expose the inner workings of the Reiner family, the circumstances leading to the tragedy, and the painstaking process of the justice system grappling with one of Hollywood's most shocking incidents. The first hearings were intense. Lawyers moved swiftly, outlining charges, reviewing evidence, and establishing a roadmap for what would become a prolonged, complex trial. Nick, representing the accused, faced legal scrutiny while also navigating personal grief, media attention, and the immense pressure of public opinion. Every motion filed, every objection raised, and every statement made carried weight, not only in the courtroom, but also in shaping the narrative that the world was following closely. The Los Angeles Police Department had already begun a meticulous investigation, documenting every detail at the Brentwood estate. Forensic teams combed through the property, carefully collecting evidence, photographs, and samples that would form the backbone of the case. The guest house where Nick lived, once a quiet sanctuary, became a focal point for investigators seeking to understand his movements, his mindset, and his possible motivations. Every room, every object, and every interaction was scrutinized, adding layers to the emerging story. In addition to physical evidence, police relied heavily on witness statements, both from family members and those familiar with the household dynamics. Romy's account of discovering the bodies was critical, as were statements from neighbors, friends, and staff who might shed light on the events leading up to the tragedy. Investigators meticulously reconstructed timelines, cross-referencing details to form a coherent narrative of what occurred in the hours and days preceding the murders. The legal team representing Nick faced immediate challenges, balancing the defense of their client while acknowledging the emotional gravity of the case required a careful approach. Alan Jackson, Nick's attorney, emphasized that his client had not yet been medically cleared to participate fully in court proceedings. This delay underscored the complex intersection of legal strategy and human well-being, highlighting that the courtroom was not only a space of judgment, but also of consideration for mental and physical health. Meanwhile, the prosecution moved quickly to establish the severity of the charges. First-degree murder carries some of the harshest penalties in the legal system, reflecting the intentional, premeditated nature of the alleged crime. Prosecutors presented initial findings to the court, outlining evidence and establishing a narrative that would support the charges. While much of the information was confidential, it was clear that law enforcement believed they had a strong case, one that would unfold over the course of months of investigation, testimony, and legal argumentation. Public reaction to the proceedings was immediate and intense. Social media platforms became hotbeds of speculation, analysis, and debate. Commentators dissected every available detail, weighing potential motives, family dynamics, and the psychology behind the alleged act. News outlets ran continuous coverage, blending factual reporting with emotional analysis to capture the human side of the tragedy. Yet amid the speculation, there was a constant reminder. Behind the headlines were real people, enduring unimaginable loss and trauma. Family dynamics played a central role in early investigations. Sibling relationships, long-standing tensions, and emotional bonds were all scrutinized as investigators attempted to understand what could have driven Nick to allegedly commit such a crime. Romy, Tracy, and Jake's statements offered glimpses into these dynamics, highlighting both the love and the strain that characterized their family life. These insights would later become critical in understanding the broader context of the case, illustrating that no single factor, event, or interaction can fully explain human behavior in moments of crisis. The investigation also revealed contradictions and unexpected details that complicated the narrative. For example, while Nick lived on the property, the relationship between him and his parents had reportedly been complex. Some sources suggested closeness, while others indicated friction or tension. Investigators needed to navigate these contradictory accounts carefully, corroborating evidence and testimony to build an accurate picture of the family environment. Every piece of information had to be scrutinized, not only for its legal relevance, but also for its contribution to understanding the human story behind the tragedy. Psychological experts began